today I will be serving you as a moderator. We are going to have an interesting presentations on good governance, organized by Good Governance Africa. 3 presenters will be talking about local decentralization and local government in Africa with a comparative perspective. Before we start, sorry for 15 minutes delay, we had a kind of technical problem. So we tried to solve it as soon as possible. And so we really apologize. Before we go to the presentation, let me invite Dr. Zareen Mohammed, the Executive Director of Good Governance Africa, for his opening remarks. He will take a few minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Jonas. Dear participants and panelists, on behalf of Good Governance Africa, Good Governance Africa, Eastern Africa, the board and myself, I would like to thank you for tuning this webinar. Please allow me to say a few words about Good Governance Africa, Good Governance Africa, Eastern Africa, and today's webinar. Good Governance Africa is an African-based civil society organization established in 2012 with the aim of contributing its share to the improvement of governance performance, to enhance accountability and transparency, and strengthen the rule of law across the continent. The organization has a mission of striving to improve the life of all citizens and promoting enhanced governance on the continent of Africa. In order to achieve this mission, GGA promotes a fact-based knowledge that arises from topical research, critical conversation, and advocacy. GGA has regional offices in different parts of the continent, and GGA Africa, Eastern Africa is one of such offices located here in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. The office was opened in January 2020 and began operation in March the same year with 5 thematic areas, namely natural resource governance, local governance, ethics and society, youth development and migration, peace and security. Although the timing of the opening of the office coincided with the advance and the spread of COVID-19 in the region in general, GGA Eastern Africa did its level best to launch its operation on various themes. Its activities in the past 2 years include a public dialogue series on the impact of COVID-19 in Ethiopia, a panel dialogue series among political parties on Ethiopian election 2021, a webinar on the election, and later in the post-election period, a public dialogue series entitled The Burden of Victory, focusing on some burning issues such as peace and security and national consensus, which the newly formed government needed to address urgently. We also designed and implemented a regional research project entitled Decentralization and Local Governance in Eastern Africa, a review of experience of selected countries. As you very well know, in politics, decentralization is a key issue as it helps us to share political power along different levels and empower citizens and their representatives to play active role in public decision-making. It also helps us to ensure effective division of responsibilities and set rules and lines of accountabilities. Meanwhile, local government play an important role in the lives of citizens as they are the one providing most of the basic and important basic services and utilities. In fact, they are often taken at the face of government since they are very close to the public, both physically and psychologically. I don't want to go in details of the project, how we selected the 5 case countries, the methodology we followed, and how we cover all these issues on the second webinar next week in the summary and comparison section. But I would like to say a few words about the objectives and significance of this project, what we start to discuss today. The main objective of the project is to understand the state of affairs pertaining to the decentralization and local governance in the 5 Eastern African countries, namely Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, Sudan, and Uganda. We believe that the outcome of the project will have twofold significance. On the one hand, it methodically examines the political power structures, decentralization, and system of local governance in each country and shows the merits and limitations of each case. By doing so, it's expected to provide critical policy inputs to policymakers. In the meantime, the result of the project will have an academic significance in contributing and advancing our knowledge in the debate regarding links between decentralization, having a strong and effective local governments, and good governance at different levels. The webinar is divided into 2 sessions. As you have noticed from the invitation, today we will have the honor of listening to the findings of 3 countries from my colleagues, Dr. Gideon Onyango from Kenya, Dr. Hassan Musheika from the Sudan, and Dr. Moses Keisa from Rwanda. Today's discussion will be moderated by my colleague, Dr. Jonas Ashini from Addis Ababa University, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Addis Ababa University and current Chairman of the Department of Political Science and International Relations. I would like to extend my appreciation to all my panelists and for Dr. Jonas for his willingness to moderate today's sessions. Thank you very much. Back to Dr. Jonas. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zagibon. It's interesting it's an honor to be a moderator here, an important topic, decentralization and local governance in Eastern Africa. So what we are going to do today is we are going to have 20 minutes each for each speaker, and we are going to invite each of them. First, I have to introduce briefly, first, alphabetically. First, Dr. Gideon Onyango, a senior lecturer in political science, University of Nairobi in Kenya. Then we have Dr. Hassan Musheika, associate professor of political science from University of Khartoum, from Sudan. So his cases will be in Sudan. And the third, Dr. Moses Keisa, assistant professor of political science, North Carolina University. His case is in Uganda, but he's speaking from the US today. So we are going to enjoy their presentation. Let us give the first 20 minutes to Dr. Gideon, then to Dr. Hassan, and to Dr. Moses, each 20 minutes, then we will open the floor to answer to question and answer. Dr. Onyango, please have 20 minutes. You can take the floor.
Yes, Jonas, I was saying thank you very much for this opportunity and for working together with you and FECADE and other colleagues in this project. I feel honored to be here and more so to be the first presenter in this very honorable forum. When I received the call to contribute to this project and I looked at the TOR, there were so many things that we could have talked about concerning the Kenyan experience with decentralization, which in our case, we are actually dealing with the issue of devolution, which has had a long and checkered history since the 1960s. So I looked at the TOR topics that could have been relevant for this project, and considering the fact that a lot has been done so far and a lot is ongoing with regard to decentralization in Kenya, I felt obligated to look into how actually the citizens are experiencing local governance and experiencing decentralization in Kenya, because that is the end product of that particular structure of government. I was feeling that a lot has been written with regard to the structure of decentralization in Kenya. A lot has been analyzed with regard to its functionality, but there are a few case studies that are actually citizen-oriented. So for the purpose of this particular project, I thought that I should look into the citizen agency and the functioning of devolved local governance in Kenya. In short, I'm actually concerned about assessing or evaluating from the citizen's perspective, from the citizen's attitude on devolution, and which I term as devolution in practice. How is devolved government being practiced, and especially from the viewpoint of those it matters to most, from the viewpoint of the citizens. And I draw my, my practical assessment from the current or the most recent data that was generated by the Afrobarometer, of which I'm also part of, and of which I was part of the team that supervised data collection for that particular time, which occurred between 13th of November and 20-something of November 2021. So I felt that for this particular forum, I should focus on those components, on the data, on how citizens feel about decentralization and whether this decentralized units or devolved government is serving the key purpose of what it is supposed to serve. For this particular presentation, I don't want to go deep into looking at the history of devolution in Kenya because of time, but I can also do that depending on how I'm guided by Jonas. I have also time for that. I can do that, but I don't know whether we have time, given that we've also started late. Let me just project my presentation, Jonas, if that is okay. But I see you disable the screen sharing. So I think I'll just go on and present my topic on citizen agency, which I've titled, and that is also the title of the chapter that I've contributed for this particular project. It is titled as Citizen Agency and the Functioning of Local Governance in Kenya. In short, I'm looking at devolution in practice. And my main starting point is that it is very important to understand the citizens' role in devolved governance, how they practice their the particular areas of public accountability, political responsiveness, and political representation. I argue that these political values have characterized debates on devolution in Kenya as elsewhere in Africa. Much as, yes, we have the governance components, the pressures from external or development actors to actually implement this kind of decentralization, but we also had pressures from within. There has been a building up of political movements or pressures on the government of the day to improve on issues of public accountability, to improve on issues of political responsiveness, and to improve on the issues of political representation. And when you take stock of the Kenyan, the journey of devolution in Kenya, the underguiding political values that have tended to inform its progression and the way it is being implemented currently revolves around these three main political values, which is political accountability, issues of political responsiveness, and political representation. Now, to measure these particular components, I used the Afrobarometer data to look at, with regard to public accountability, I looked at institutional trust and collective action. With regard to political representation, I looked at issues of political leadership and citizen voice. And with regard to political responsiveness, I looked at data or findings that tend to focus on the contact, the relationship between the citizens and their political representatives, which in this case, we are talking about members of county assemblies and members of parliament. Just to mention as a disclaimer is that when we talk about decentralization in Kenya, we're talking about devolution, and this entails devolution of the legislative arm of government and the devolution of the executive arm of the government that took place, that started in 2013. The official implementation or adoption of devolved government in Kenya began in around 27th March 2013, after the election of the current regime that is outgoing, the current government rather, that is now outgoing. So in other words, we are saying that devolution has had the implementation or the effort to realize effectiveness of devolved government has so far occurred under the same government, the same president since it was rolled out in 2013. And now Kenya is heading for elections on 9th next month. We are seeing another government that is coming in. So far, so good. Devolution was supposed to be implemented through 3 phases. The first phase was to deal with the issue of putting things in place, the staffing, the logistics. That was supposed to happen before 2013 when the election was supposed to happen, because devolution came in 2010 after the promulgation of the constitution in that particular year. So the new constitution rolled out the devolved government, and the new government that was supposed to come in during elections of 2013 was the first government that was supposed to actualize those structures in place. So the first phase was supposed to take place between 2008, when we were preparing for this particular structure of government, to actually 2010. The second phase was supposed to take place after election, and the third phase was supposed to take place after these particular 2 phases. However, this has not happened as was scheduled, and there's a lot of information regarding that, which I will excuse myself from because of time. So coming back to my topic, when we talk about issues, I will just go into presenting the data that I have insofar as citizen agency is concerned. My main fundamental question is, how is devolution being practiced? Because we see in the TOR of this project, there is a concern with the practice of decentralization. So in this particular paper or this particular chapter, I was trying to demonstrate the practice of devolution in Kenya. So how is devolution being practiced or experienced in Kenya by the Kenyans or by citizens? And the second component that we also find in this particular project that is also fundamental for this particular project.
Sorry, I think Dr. Onyango has encountered a problem, maybe a technical problem.
Yes, so that is my my topic. So far, the reason why I'm looking at this particular component just to justify my case is that when you look at devolution in Kenya, the objective of the devolution in Kenya is, 1, to promote democratic and accountable exercise of power. I'm reading from the Constitution of Kenya just to provide you with the background of it all. And 2 is to foster national unity by recognizing diversity, to give powers of self-governance to the people, and to enhance participation of the people in the exercise of power, and to promote social and economic development, among others, and to facilitate the decentralization of state organs and their functions and public service delivery. Meaning, we realize that these 3 components of governance, public accountability, political responsiveness, and political representation, are the main core, summarizes the entire objective of devolution. And just to look into my data here, just a bit, just a minute. I don't know how to navigate this, but just a bit here. Dealing with my data here. I'll do that. Good. Now, sorry for this. I'm just going into the data part. Now, I've already talked about this. So, to map an issue of public accountability in Kenya, we started by just mapping generally the most important problems over time, and we went back much as yes, the data, we have data from 2003, but we went back four years, or since 2014, because devolution began, the adoption of decentralization in Kenya began in 2013. So we went back 2014, 2016, 2019, and the current information that we're looking at. Now, if you look at these summary or that particular graph that I'm presenting, you see that there are issues that Kenyans are very concerned about, and which, let's note that, and which devolution plays a critical role in solving, because in the end, or at the end, it is within the devolved structures that the management of the economy should be actualized properly, addressing issues of corruption should be actualized, issues of unemployment and all that. The reason also why I look at public accountability in the lenses of these particular problems is also to measure what I was talking about here, the extent to which institutional trust exists within this, among the citizens to view or to consider these structures to be effective or capable enough of addressing these particular problems, and the extent to which or what they have done to ensure that the government at the local level is effectively dealing with the issues of, let's say, water supply, education, health. These are issues, poverty reduction, which are, these are issues that are at the center of decentralization. The question of health, the health services have been decentralized, the issues of security, the issues of education, the issues of water supply and other services, and other critical services, and also most importantly, the issues of accountability of resources that are being decentralized to county governments. And we see there from that graph that corruption has persistently been at the forefront, or there has been a problem, there has been a deficit with the issue of public accountability since 2014, when devolved government was put in place. Other studies have found the consistency of the lack of accountability. So let's look at the issue of institutional trust, particularly. What does data say about that? So from these data, institutions trust here, sorry for that, we see that citizens' trust in institutions differ. And we look at the county structures or the devolved government structures. There we see the county assembly, and we look at the governor in particular. You see that they are not doing very well. Those who are asked, we presented them with these particular institutions, the religious leaders, the army, courts of law, traditional leaders, and all that. And you see that religious leaders are even performing better. The traditional leaders are even performing better than the governors who are the CEOs of county governments and the county assemblies, which are representing people at the local level. So we consider that the fact that the governor is at 39% and county assemblies are at 35%, almost, you know, they are the fourth and the fifth least performing institutions, puts to question the extent to which these local government structures are serving the people. So then we went to the issue of collective action, the extent to which people mobilize themselves to counter these issues of corruption, to put their voices out there, collectively mobilize themselves to handle these issues of corruption, the issues of public distrust, and all that. And we found out that just a bit, we found out that when we asked the people, the question that was asked is that, how often have you attended a community meeting? How often have you joined others to raise an issue, especially with the county governments and with the members of the county assembly? And how often have you attended a demonstration or a protest march? And that is the data here. We realize that 9% said that they will never do this. They will never attend a meeting to assert their voices in for example, in the county budgeting processes, or with regard to other collective action that will ensure that they assert their citizenship or they assert their agency in matters of governance at the local level. So others, when you talk about no, will do it if I had the chance. 40% thought that they can do it when they had a chance. It means that a majority of people, if given the chance, will participate in these community meetings, because at the local government level, we also have the wards. It is at the wards where some decisions are being carried out, especially with regard to projects that are serving that particular ward. Wards are now almost the smallest unit of decentralization at that particular level, where the communities are expected to come together to discuss some issues concerning how the government should carry out particular projects, how they should prioritize some particular issues. And we find out that majority of people, if given the chance, they will do that. But there's a problem with that as well. We realize that there are no very effective mechanisms in place to bring citizens on board. We noticed that, other studies also refers to this with regard to the evolution, how it is being practiced in Kenya. We noticed that the issue of institutionalization of this particular, we still have this institutional deficits with regard to how devolved government is being experienced and with regard to how the citizens relate to it. So it is not surprising, therefore, that 17% only have attended once or twice issues with regard to community meeting, and only 13% have often attended this, and 19% have attended this several times. So it points to us the issues of collective action at the local level, which enable citizens to assert their voices or to assert their agencies on programs or public policy processes that need to hold these government structures accountable. And with regard to raising their issues, others also thought that, majority thought that if they are given a chance, they will do that. It means that there's consciousness. In general, we can say that this consciousness with regard to issues of collective action. However, majority will never do that. Majority will never take proactive measures to assert their voices in terms of participating, for example, in a demonstration or a march against, for example, corruption or a collapse of other service delivery, health systems or water supply systems. And you see there 66% say that they will never participate in demonstrations or protests. And we see that 2% are the only ones who have attended several times issues for the call for demonstrations. You see, like in South Africa, you can say that every week we have a demonstration in as far as public service delivery is concerned, almost every week. Now, this is very different when you come to Kenya, just for the comparative purposes. You see that only 2% will prefer to go that way, to engage, to adopt proactive ways of engaging the government on issues of public service delivery or on how these particular governments are functioned. Now to go to the issues of political representation. There is, I said that I looked at, we look at the issue of political leadership, or my data look at the issue of political leadership and the citizen voice. And the question that was asked in as far as this particular area, or what I can say, mechanism of governance or way of asserting, of improving citizen agency, is that we asked that the extent to which citizens have gotten together with others to hold their members, local members, assembly members accountable, or in as far as the community problems are concerned. At what extent have you gotten together with others and make your member of county assembly listen to the community problems? And that is the results. So we see that 32% are more likely, they are very likely to engage with others, or to come together with others to engage with their member of county assembly, followed by some who thought, by 28% who said that they are somewhat likely to do that. 24%, which is surprisingly also a high number in as far as that particular issue is concerned, political representation, because the evolution was also supposed to address representation deficit, which has been a problem since independence. We've had serious problems with the mechanisms of representation and how it has been carried forward. And hence, devolution is supposed to resolve these deficit, representation deficit. So you see, when some say that not at all likely at 24%, almost the same number of those who say somewhat likely or very likely, then it means that we have we still have a lot of work to do in as far as citizens' knowledge is concerned, or what we can say, the internalization of devolved structures and how it should serve them at the local level, and the extent to which they hold their political representatives accountable in as far as devolved government's functions are concerned. Just to move fast again. So when it comes to, we say that we are also looking at the citizen voice there. So when it comes to the frequency of contacting political representatives or the authorities in the county government, these are government institutions or county government institutions. So we also looked at the variation, the frequency in the lines of never, only once, a few times, often, or they don't know. So you see there what data reads when we asked what is the frequency that you've contacted your local government councillor. 75%, surprisingly or unsurprisingly, said they have never contacted their local government councillor. This is MCA or the authorities in county government. 10% said once, a few times 9%, often 6%. Those who we are lucky we don't have those who don't know about this. To what extent have you contacted your MP? 87%, they have never contacted their MP. To what extent have you contacted the political party official? 89% said they have never. To what extent have you contacted your traditional leader? 68% said never. So we also have a deficit there in as far as citizen agencies concerned, withholding or with putting their local government and representative officials to task in as far as devolution is concerned. Now I'll move to the next component, which is the next dimension, which I think is also very important for the county or the local government to function. And this is with regard to political responsiveness. Now, when we talk about political responsiveness here, we looked at the contact between citizens and MCAs and MPs. And we also looked at the extent to which the citizens can access information in the public authorities or in the public institutions. What we mean by contact here is the extent, especially MCAs being cognizant of the needs of their citizens or of their constituencies. So this is the perception on how much MPs and MCA listen to the ordinary people. Are they responsive to their issues? So we looked at never, only, sometimes, often, always, or don't know. So MPs, the perception of citizens in as far as their members of parliament can listen to the ordinary people, to them, is at 43%. They never listen to the ordinary people. Only sometimes at 39%, often at 12%, always 6%, and don't know came at 1%. And members of the county assembly, 42%. The numbers are relatively the same, with 1 percentage point extra or lower, as that data as that data shows that. Now, access to information. So we looked at these three areas: access to information, especially issues of when we talk about education, and this is the school budget, access to information of local government development plan and budget. And we looked at also access to information with regard to local government funding, and that is the percentage. Not at all likely, the likelihood of them accessing that information at 50% says that they are not at all likely to access information on school budget. 55% said that they are not at all likely to access information on local government development plan and budget. And 60% say that they are not at all likely to access information on local government funding. I think from where I sit, that gives us very serious deficit on issues of governance when it comes to citizen agency and the extent to which the citizens can pressurize or can hold the governments accountable or can influence decision making at the local level, or are integrated into the policy making or public policy processes in general. So then we look at the issue of the extent to which now the administration, the devolved governments offer assistance to the citizens, or the extent to which they have citizens have asked for such particular assistance in as far as administrative issues are concerned. For those in public policy, we are talking about issues of surrounding or bordering on what we call the administrative burden in as far as devolved structures are concerned, because devolution and its administrative structures are supposed to reduce some of the administrative burdens in as far as resources are concerned, in as far as knowledge is concerned, and in as far as access of information is concerned. So we found that accessing administrative assistance from local government addresses the conundrum that has affected the centralized form of or structure of government. So when we looked at the access to administrative assistance and we looked at them on the parameters of not at all likely, not very likely, somewhat likely, very likely, don't know, we see that the likelihood of response to request assistance by the citizens, 39% said that they're not not at all likely to ask for assistance from administrators. And that points to us something in as far as how devolution is being experienced, how it is being practiced, and how citizens are relating to it, how citizens feel that devolution is there for them, or the extent to which they feel they have been integrated into governance processes. And I think for the sake of time, we can also look at that just as the presentation. I think most of you have seen those percentages, and we see that 46% are not likely at all to report corruption. That takes us back to also the issue of public accountability. So because of time, I think I will conclude there. And I will say that in conclusion, I will say that devolution in Kenya is still being experienced, and a lot has been done. A lot is being done in as far as making it effective is concerned. The government has put up mechanisms in place, both legal and institutional, to try to address issues of devolution that are coming at the implementation level, issues of coordination, issues of power struggles between the center and the local government, interinstitutional tug of war. The government has come up with a lot of legislation to try to address this. So it is essential to note that decentralization, much as yes, it is good and it is very promising, it is not a magic bullet for solving governance deficits experienced at the local levels. Instead, it is essentially a function of other more critical components, which in this case border on citizen agency, mechanisms of citizens agency, and institutional and political cultures therefore matter in as far as practicing devolution or realizing is concerned. So these components determine the access to elected representatives, they determine public service, the degree of public trust, and therefore they are very critical in institutionalizing devolved structures for effective implementation. And by so saying, we are also saying that they are very critical in ensuring the formal functionality of local governance in any setting. So, however, problems faced by devolution, especially in regard to Kenya, have a deeper root in the problematics of the Kenyan state itself and the politics of state transformation. Some of the governance deficits that our county governments in Kenya are currently dealing with find their rooting in the broader constellations of political structures. These tend to trickle down to local systems, and they eventually take a life of their own or develop their own local political characteristics, which actually also now informs the complexity of corruption at the local level.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that is enough. Yes.
It is a lot of issues, a lot of trends, especially the devolution of the practice of devolution of local governance in Kenya. And it's interesting that you have done it from how citizens perceive the performance, the practice of local governance and devolution transformation in Kenya. So we have a lot to discuss about these issues. But before that, I have to invite Dr. Moses Kisa, because we couldn't have Dr. Hassan Ahmed from Khartoum. He is encountering technical problem. We'll wait for him. Dr. Moses, please have your 20 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Jonas, and thank you, other colleagues who've been organizing this, Dr. Fekade and Dr. Zerhun. Let me share the screen here real quick. All right, I hope you can see my screen. Okay. All right, yep. So I was saying thank you to Dr. Jonas, and thank you to Dr. Fekade and Dr. Zerhun for organizing this and for inviting me to participate. I worked on the Ugandan case study together with my colleague, Dr. Sebastian Rengabo, who unfortunately is not able to join us. So I'll give some, quick, sort of summary of ideas on the Ugandan case study, and I'll take no more than 20 minutes, Jonas. So expect that. So Uganda has been operating a decentralized system of local governance since the current government came into power in 1986, but especially after 1995 when a new constitution was promulgated, and in 1997 the local government law was passed. And our assessment and evaluation of the Ugandan case study leads us to conclude that the result up to now has been a mixed bag of some great promise initially and some good progress as well that was undertaken and achieved in the early stages of implementing local governance through decentralization, through devolution of power. The idea actually was that power should be devolved to a wide range of local government units at the lowest level possible. But on the other hand, there has been over the years decay and decline, as I would call it. A lot of things have gone wrong. There has been a failure in many areas of implementation. And sort of our way of summarizing this is to say that there has been a big disjuncture, or a big gulf between the theory, the promise on the one hand, and the practice on the other. A lot of what was promised has not been realized. So the Ugandan decentralization system emanated out of what was initially a very impressive design of creating subnational administrative units. This came out an initial system of resistance councils that were later renamed local councils. And the resistance councils had, started way back when the current government was still a rebel group. But the idea was to create local governance at especially the district level as well as the sub-county level. So those two very important critical areas and spaces for exercising local governance at the district and the sub-county, but also further down to the parish level as well as the village level in rural areas. And in urban centers, the system was supposed to devolve further down from the district further down to the municipality, to the division, and then again further down to wards and cells within urban areas. So this was supposed to be a multi-layered system radiating from the lowest level to the highest level at the district level. So a multi-layered, multi-tier system that local governance was supposed to be exercised. But our assessment leads us to no other conclusion other than that, just as the overall system of governance in Uganda at the national level, which is hugely, patronage client afflicted, local governance in Uganda hasn't been any different. The same dynamics of politics at the national level play out at the local level. And this, we argue, is untenable. It doesn't, so neo-patrimonialism, although I hate that concept, and the idea of patronage client politics it doesn't help the cause of genuine devolution of power as it had been intended, especially if we're talking about decentralization and a democratic system of government. So the patron client politics in Uganda at the broad national level, and also more specifically at the sub-national levels, has fueled a practice of fragmentation, national fragmentation, the creation of administrative units that are unviable, and administrative units that serve more as avenues and tools of patronage networks rather than as proper systems and processes of local government in a substantive way. So there has been a creation of all sorts of local government structures, but the substance of it remains rather disappointing in practice. So just a small note by way of background is to argue, to suggest that Uganda's decentralization system was actually initially anchored on what was a fairly progressive legal and constitutional arrangement. As I noted, beginning with initially beginning with the rebel governance structure of the National Resistance Army that had fought for power from 1981 to 1986. And the NRA had a popular participatory and grassroots system of engaging with the public when it was still a rebel group. So the idea was to root the rebel group's activities among the people. This is, many of you folks who are familiar with, the Maoist idea of guerrilla insurgency, the idea that guerrillas must be anchored and rooted in people's social and cultural spaces as a way of survival. Just as the fish has to survive in water, guerrilla fighters cannot survive unless they're able to swim among the people. So the NRA had this grassroots structure of engaging with the people for all sorts of purposes, both logistical and practical as a fighting group. So it was on the basis of this rebel governance system that was initially implemented in the areas that the NRA controlled as a rebel group, primarily central Uganda, but also parts of the West. So that system of resistance councils was the initial basis for implementing decentralized governance. And that initial experimentation was given legal and constitutional anchor and cover in 1995 when a new constitution was passed, and later on in 1997 when the Local Government Act was passed as the legal basis for implementing a decentralized system of government. And on the whole, in the early stages, Uganda, along with Ghana, were considered to have been doing very well, and were seen as models of African, power devolution practices, and empowering people. And this promise, in Uganda, entailed, among other things, the transformation of relations between the central state and local, structures, and this, came out of the backdrop of a history of highly centralized governance in Uganda, going back to the colonial times, but also, a form of local exercise of power that was unaccountable and as has been captured in studies by people like Mamdani about the way decentralized systems in colonial states like Uganda was highly despotic. So and decentralization in Uganda itself came out of that experience of trying to reform the way the center operated at the local level, making localized governance that was more democratic and more accountable, but also enhancing, popular participation by local people, and not having everything done and determined at the center far away. And then there was a promise of fiscal autonomy, so financial decentralization. So the Ugandan decentralized system basically entailed three core aspects: political decentralization, administrative decentralization, as well as fiscal decentralization. So those three pillars, one was supposed to provide political empowerment, grant local participation to the public. And then the second one, administrative decentralization, was meant to make bureaucratic decision-making and procedures more closer to the people at the local level. And then lastly, financial decentralization was supposed to deepen fiscal autonomy at the local level in terms of revenue generation. And strengthening political and bureaucratic accountability. So these were the promises, and this was sort of the theory and the arrangement that was supposed to be implemented. Now, in practice, what has happened over the last 30 years or so is that there has been, an explosion in localized political participation, all sorts of local elective offices. I think you cannot count Uganda's elective offices and you finish them. There are way too many, going all the way to the village level, the lowest unit. And there has been, some real exercise of power at the subnational level, with powerful actors and especially political elites that have benefited from power devolution, at least at the political level, and in a substantive way, especially in the early years, local councils, initially resistance councils, provided very important avenues for solving local problems, particularly critical issues like local security. So the village level councils were very important in understanding and tackling security issues at the local level, adjudicating disputes around land issues, dealing with community community disagreements of water resources and those sorts of things. So the local structures have been important in helping solve certain critical substantive problems at the local level, and providing a platform and a voice that otherwise wouldn't exist if the system of decentralization wasn't in place. But that, and I've sort of just touched on a few points to illustrate what I'm trying to say. And the details of the Ugandan case study are in the chapter that somebody interested would read. So, but the pitfalls and the problems have been enormous. On the other hand, as I noted earlier on, fragmentation. So the process, the system of devolving power became a big incentive to intra-national, local level, fragmentation and the creation and extension of, patron-client networks and relations, linking national level elites with their local agents in ways that has not served the purpose for which decentralization was actually intended. And then there remains, heavy dependence of local government units on the center in terms of, resources ranging from human resources to financial resources when it comes to actual service delivery. The central state actors continue to unduly influence electioneering processes at the local level, thereby actually undermining local agency and taking away the sort of local empowerment that decentralization was supposed to bring about. So you have, government ministers and other state actors from the center who, wield a lot of power and influence at the local level, and they determine election outcomes, especially in areas that are contested where there is strong opposition. So the heavy hand of the central state elites and elite actors at the local level has not helped matters in terms of the deepening and strengthening of genuine decentralized governance in different parts of Uganda. And then look, the central government has remained very much, interfering with the day-to-day activities and functions of decentralized governments. In fact, even going as far as appropriating and retaking certain functions and powers that are supposed to be part of the devolved power. So there has been, in a practical sense, a re-centralization of power, in recent years. So, for example, in our paper, we show that during different financial years, for example, in financial year 2018-2019, the national budget allocated to decentralization fell from 13% to 10%, and this reduction in the budget, national budget that goes to decentralized unit, this drop was in part because of re-centralizing certain functions and certain activities. Revenue underperformance has remained a big problem for local governments. For example, in 2020 financial year, the Auditor General pointed out that the government disbursed only 86% of the budget that was supposed to go to local governments, and the local governments have also had issues of absorption capacity, often not able to spend money allocated in part because there are all sorts of logistical bottlenecks, a lot of them coming from the center. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up, Jonas, in a minute. So I am within the 20 minutes that you allocated to me. Just some quick sort of conclusions and implications. So at the heart of Uganda's decentralized conundrum, we propose, is that it's, genuinely empowered local governments are seen as a problem for central elites, under conditions of autocratic rule. Empowering decentralized units and granting real power, political and fiscal, means that the center loses control, and for Museveni and his government for a long time, really having a hold and control over, subnational units has been an overarching goal. And over time, that, paranoia and that imperative of wanting to control and maintain a strong hold on, different parts of the country means that the central government, central elites have they have as their goal, undermining genuine devolution of power, because that's part of the power calculus. So, for example, it used to be that a chief administrative officer, who is basically the chief executive officer of a district, the chief bureaucrat of the district, used to be accountable and would report to the local district leadership, elected leadership. But since 2005, the constitution was amended such that the CAO, the CAO, the chief administrative officers, now appointed and report to the central government, basically to the president and the local government minister. So that's a clear case of recentralizing power that has happened over time. And this was done despite, spirited opposition from donors, from the local government association, and even from the Constitutional Review Commission itself that did constitutional amendments, that provided the report for constitutional amendment in 2005. And then, one of the issues I pointed out earlier is the proliferation and fragmentation of local government units. The creation of all sorts of new districts, new sub-counties, and other units. It sort of ended up, undermining genuine decentralization, because you create units that have no capacity to function. You create districts and sub-counties that are unviable, that are unable to do anything because they don't have the budget, they don't have the human resource capacity, they don't have the technical competencies, and so on and so forth. And then there's the issue of local human resource capacity. The president and other actors have been at loggerheads over academic qualifications for local government officials like councillors and sub-county chairpersons and so on and so forth. Museveni doesn't want there to be any academic qualifications for people elected at the local level other than district chairpersons. That raises the question of what quality of leaders are elected at the local level if you don't have any minimum qualifications. And then there is the issue of the role of the ruling party in an otherwise multi-party system, NRM, which operates as a state party and in many ways interferes with and undermines local governments. And then the issue of local revenue generation, basically fiscal decentralization has more or less failed in Uganda because local governments are not able to generate their own revenue. They used to have graduated personal tax, which was abolished in 2006. And now local governments have to depend on the central government for their revenue. Okay, I'm going to end there, Jonas. There's the issue of decentralizing corruption. The more administrative units you create at the local level, the more corruption you take closer to the people. So instead of taking services closer to the people, you actually take graft and corruption closer to the people. So I'm going to end there. I think my 20 minutes are up. And thank you very much for your kind audience.
Thank you, Dr. Moses Kisha. A very interesting, very insightful presentation, and a lot of issues can be bring to the to the floor for the discussion. At least I can mention three or two things. One, that impressive decentralization process during the resistance era. I was wondering how a structure which functioned during the resistance era failed, during the governance age. That is a predicament of many liberation movements all over Africa. The failure of governance, democratization, and so on. I hope you will reflect later that. The second one is a formal, impressive decentralization process, encountering informal patron-client relation, which is a parallel structure which hijack or arrest the process of decentralization in Uganda. This is also theoretically relevant to other African states, especially the relationship between formal and informal, the state structure and the parallel rhizome or non-informal structures that hijack, that capture the states, or we call it the shadow local government or whatever you call it. So these are the two important, I mean, as we see in the electoral politics, we have seen this in the party system, we have seen it in the constitutional making, and now in the local governance all over Africa. So we will be hopefully discussing on that line. I think I have taken much time instead of opening the floor for discussion. Dear participant, please welcome to this. I have to thank you and welcome you to this panel. And we had two presentations by Moses and Onyango from Kenya. We couldn't have Hassan today. Hopefully we'll have him next week, but I have to open the floor for your comments, question. So I'm opening the floor for discussion, questions, comment from the participants.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jonas. I thank very much Gideon and Moses for their presentation. I was wondering, like, Uganda was one of the pioneer states in introducing local decentralization during the early 2000s, late 1990s. Uganda was presented as a model for the rest of Africa by the World Bank and others, how to decentralize, devolve authority to the local level. Kenya, after, as Gideon rightly said, there was a very long struggle regarding evolution, decentralization. After the 2010 constitution, 47 counties were established, more of a quasi-federal kind of structure. And in the presentation, Gideon showed how people are not that much happy with these institutions. There is not that much of an agency, there is distrust. And also, Moses said in his conclusion, or even at the very beginning, he said, this is the experience of Uganda is a mixed case. So linking both papers, presentations, I was wondering, during the 1990s, decentralization, devolution was sold as one of the major instruments to solve the problem of governance in Africa. After 2010 in Kenya, there is frustration. Local corruption, some say there is decentralization of corruption. In Uganda, also there is a trend of re-centralization. So looking at these experiences, I was wondering about what worked and what did not work in the decentralization projects of Uganda and Kenya. How ethnicity, rise of ethno-nationalism is affecting decentralization, devolution in Kenya and Uganda. How the politics of authoritarianism, you cannot expect perfect or good devolution, decentralization if politics at the center is authoritarian. So under the context of authoritarian politics in Kenya, probably in Kenya is a little bit changed, but in Uganda, how we expect local governments to function, and also the global pressures. During the 1990s, the good governance reform, structural adjustment programs, the Western donors were in the front seat of decentralization, devolution efforts in Africa. What has changed with respect to the donors, the foreign powers? So I think this could help us to bring some insights. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Eyob, please, you may have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jonas, for giving me the opportunity to reflect on the presentation. And I also thank both the presenters, Moses and Gideon. I think this is a very useful platform to reflect on a number of issues. And I also thank the organizers. I have, from the two presentations, I've learned two things. One, they are methodologically, I think they approach the issue of decentralization and devolution in a very different, from two different points of view. I understand Gideon's approach was very much, I would say, dominated by this normative understanding of governance, primarily linked with a good governance overall agenda, where we can quantify and measure certain features of governance activities, which I find quite problematic because we will not find those assumed normative elements, normative perspectives of governance and practice of government within many African countries as it is imagined, primarily because of the conception of this very positivist understanding of politics, primarily copied from the Western world. And I think that's why Gideon needed to give us some additional reflections, especially at the end of his presentation, where he was talking about the problematic nature of the Kenyan state, its colonial emergence, and how politics that emerged from that period functions in a very different logic than the way it's imagined and somehow pursued through this good governance perspective, where you have all those Afrobarometer parameters. They may give us some insights, but I think they have more to conceal that to provide us any perspective. However, I find Moses' approach quite useful and informative for us, primarily because instead of just simply using a normative point of departure, he tries to understand how the political process, starting from that resistance period, continue to evolve and become more formalized and create some kind of room to maneuver for the political elite, but also create some problem because it's point of that's a place of governance rather than creating some kind of a challenge. So I think explaining that relationship is quite informative and very helpful. And that's where I think the key issue is. And Jonas, you were also referring to the shadow or the informal aspect of governance. I think instead of just simply characterizing informal institutions of politics and political relations as problems by themselves, I think it's much more important to understand the interplay between the formal and the informal relations and how they can continue to serve the interests of the majority. Of course, politicians who are in power will always try to manipulate them, but that's not always the case. And for us to understand that interplay would be very important. Second, I think both the case of Uganda and Kenya and for many other African countries, we definitely need to give proper consideration to the colonial legacy, to the post-Cold War world order and the new liberal restructuring of government, and how what Tandika used to say, the institutional monotasking and monocropping, just simply crafting certain kinds of features of government and trying to implement and impose it in some completely different context is the one that's really creating more problem, where we see most of these governance structures become just, as you said, devolution of corruption or devolution of that, just simply increasing the size of the cake. I think that kind of understanding is much more insightful, and it will help us to understand the complexities rather than just to take that normative assumption, which certainly takes politics out of the question for our, at least for the intellectual assessors, as well as for any policy relevant insights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eyob. Can you address or reflect on those questions, Moses and Gideon first? Then we can have the second round. So either of you, Moses or Gideon, you may take the floor.
I can go first and I'll be real quick.
Great.
Yeah, so Jonas, I think your 2 points are very well made, and I sort of and they tie into what Eyob was saying, and to some extent Dr. Snake. So the rebel governance experiment, that the NRA had in the 80s and which became the basis of government once they came into power, I think was a very important innovation in many ways, and helped to give a more organic and sort of robust system of government. As you guys know, there was even the whole idea of no party politics, which was meant to be an alternative to a multi-party system, and all that was sort of rooted in the ideological orientation and predisposition of the NRA as a rebel group, and of Museveni as a state builder. I mean, all that came to a head, really. I think, by the end of the 90s, things had started sort of going south. And I agree with both Dr. Snake and Dr. Eyob that the decentralized arrangement cannot be understood outside of the national politics and of the overall structure of politics in a country like Uganda. In many ways, what happens at the local level is a mirror image of what happens at the national level. And so, things started going south in Uganda, late 90s, early 2000s, in large measure because really Museveni decided, or at least now started showing that he wanted to be a president for life. Okay, anyway, he did not want to go anywhere. That's how the constitution is changed in 2005 for him to, literally become a life president, which he is now, especially after the age limit provision was removed in 2017. Now the guy wants to rule until he dies. So that sort of determination to be a president for life has had enormous implications for not just national politics, but also local politics as well, and decentralization. So in a sense, I'm trying to answer Dr. Snake's question. I don't know whether I really have a good answer, but, because Snake was wondering, why, or I think Jonas, it was you who was wondering, why would a sort of fairly decent and promising rebel governance system operate well with the rebels, and they're able to capture power, and they do sort of innovative things at the beginning, but then things start going wrong along the way. In many ways, I mean, my own reflections on these issues of Uganda has been to come around to concluding that it's the curse of power. It's the curse of power at the end of the day. The power pursuits have been such that, Museveni and NRM are willing to do anything and everything, okay, that will enable them keep state power at the center. If that means re-centralizing local government, then so be it. If undermining local government units is going to help Museveni keep a grip on power, then he is willing to do anything and everything. And so that's kind of my overall way of seeing, the situation with the local government in Uganda, which is not detached from the national government. And then there is the question of the informal, formal power relations that Jonas raised and Dr. Eyob was also alluding to. Again, I mean, I personally don't sort of try and make a sharp distinction between the two. Institutions are always formal and informal, and politics plays out in both informal and formal spaces. I think at the end of the day, how does the balance between the two affect outcomes that we are interested in this case, the functioning and the quality of local government? How is it affected by power relations that combine informal and formal rules informal and formal structures and so on and so forth. The patron-client relations that I spoke about that are very much at the heart of Ugandan politics and African politics generally need not be seen as inherently antithetical to, quote unquote, good governance. But there is an extent to which, informal power plays at the end of the day hurt, the public good. So if you look at, for example, what I ended with by talking about sort of decentralization in Uganda becoming decentralization of corruption and graft, taking corruption closer to the people rather than taking services closer to the people. That has a lot to do with informal power and with, the way in which individuals operating outside of, formal structures of government at the center and at the local level wield and exercise power and resources in ways that undermine public good. And so you end up with, money meant for roads and water and whatever stolen by powerful local elites. I'm going to end in a minute and then I'll let Gideon take over. Both Asnake and Dr. Yob were alluding to an important point about sort of the external environment. So in the 1990s, Uganda was presented as a model, not just of decentralization, but many other things, including, neoliberal economic policies, even, the whole idea of popular politics and participation. Uganda was seen as, things are, happening very well in Uganda, and Uganda is a model and an example for the rest of Africa in many ways. I mean, I'm, with hindsight, of course, now I'm very skeptical of how that story of Uganda was oversold, especially by the IMF and the World Bank. I think they really wanted a good student of neoliberalism and a good governance agenda to sell to the rest of the world and to present a successful A student, and Uganda was sort of that A student that was marketed. We now know that, a lot of what was being presented in very rosy terms was not as good because it has not stood the test of time. Things were still evolving and there were good signs at the beginning, but it was, I think, the World Bank and other international donors were too quick to give Uganda a very rosy picture and give it the kinds of praises that it got, and I think Museveni's own power pursuits haven't helped matters at all, as I pointed out. He's willing to go down, with everything, all the achievements and progress that were made in the 90s and early 2000s are really being eroded at the behest of his lust for power that somehow he just can't have enough of it. Anyway, let me pause there, so Gideon can take it up from there.
Thank you, Moses. Gideon, you may have the floor.
Yes, I think Moses has really done a good job answering those questions. I wish I could just copy and paste it. But what comes to mind? There are a lot of questions here that have been put in place. Some are just interrogating this entire project of decentralization and all that. But I'll begin by what Dr. Asnake has asked, that what has worked and what is not working. In the context of Kenya, I would say that we are still experimenting, and oftentimes when we talk about what has worked and what has not worked, we tend to oftentimes succumb into this optimal performance narrative that we expect that when we have decentralized government in place, then automatically things are going to be resolved. And that's why I was saying that decentralization is not a magic bullet. It goes through like any other structure of government, like any other reform experience. It is an incremental process. So we tweak in some areas, and in other areas we reform it. And that's what the Kenyan government has been experiencing. There was a lot of hope during the rollout of revolution in Kenya in 2013, and people thought that it was going to resolve a lot of things. But what we need to note is that there is a lot of political will that comes with these kinds of decentralization, especially the one that tends to take power from the center. And as Dr. Kisa is demonstrating the case of Uganda, I think there's a lot of similarity, and also it is also similar, and it is also relatable to other contexts as well. So I can say that devolution in Kenya has opened up some opportunities and has opened up the rural areas for, for development. There's a lot that has been happening, and we have in Kenya, we have the performance of counties, the indexing of how we see which county is performing and which one is not performing. And there has been some progress, especially in northern and eastern African, eastern counties, the formerly Eastern Province and the northeastern province areas. The counties in that area have done well in terms of other investments and opening up the rural area for infrastructural development, the creation of some industrial projects that are ongoing, which have trickled down to increase the cash income of the population in those areas. So in as far as we are concerned, we cannot say that, very confident, you cannot say that this has worked, and this has not worked. We are still working with this project. Some are working. In some areas, we are confronting some challenges, and in some areas, we are tweaking it to make it work. So I think that can answer that question. But also, something I want to point out is that reform like decentralization needs political will, but political objectives also change with time. And some political objectives might align with the might align appropriately with the objectives of that particular project or reform, and others might go against it. And I think the case of Uganda tries, I can say that the extent to which decentralization has changed in Uganda or has evolved over time to become what Dr. Kisa is describing it to be, is also embedded, it or is underpinned by the political objectives or the political objectives of the regime in place over time. Perhaps by that time, it was more consumed with making this work, but over time, after it has consolidated its authority and all this, it has diverted to other objectives. Now, concerning issues of the rise of internationalism, that's Dr. Icha was talking about. I think that the project devolution in Kenya is, as I stated from the beginning, is both of a combination of the wave of governance and the pressure that has built over time, that has been characterized by the fight for democratization or democratic space. Devolution and especially decentralization in Kenya has been embedded in this struggle over time. And when it came all of a sudden in 2010, despite a lot of compromises that undergirds it or that characterized it, it was seen as a triumph of these struggles to open up the political space and to increase or improve the representation, issues of public accountability and all these. I would also like to mention that devolution in Kenya has been characterized a lot with elite political segments. There are those who believe that devolution, actually, the one we are currently implementing, was a watered down version of what was initially intended, which from where I stand or from where I sit, I think this watering down process is embedded in the elite pacting or settlements that took place to ensure that some compromises were reached, and which is normal in any political system. There has to be compromises that are made. There has to be power struggles that come with it. So the internationalization component here also comes that we've seen a lot of money being injected by or technical support that World Bank Kenya is giving to the government to realize devolution. The World Bank is actually proactively involved in the implementation, in the realization of this of decentralization in Kenya, and we are seeing the synergies of the international donors model of governance, as teacher says, and the local dimensions of it. So there is a swing that is characterizing implementation of this devolution. Now, politics of authoritarianism, the autocratic norms, we cannot rule them out because even the current regime in place was being campaigned before it came in. It was being campaigned on the grounds that it is an anti-devolution. It is for centralization. And there has been a lot of accusation that the central government has really fought against devolution in Kenya. And there has been a lot of debates on increasing the financial support from the center to the devolved unit so that it can work effectively, because there's historical connotation to that. Previously, under Majiboism, it was said that the central government ostensibly denied the devolved units the funds so that it would fail. And the same story is being promoted in regard to how the center and the decentralized units are relating in as far as resources are concerned. And it is a big debate right now. In my paper, I've alluded to issues of BBI and the conundrums and the issues that are debates that are characterizing that whole process. The global pressures, I can relate that to the issues of internationalism, as Dr. Asinake was talking about, asking. Then when you come to the issues of the problematic nature of the state, yes, I agree with Icha. There is a lot that is still under consideration, and there's a lot that comes about because of the legacies of state formation, colonial state formation, which we are still struggling up to date. And one of them is these autocratic norms and the efforts to recenter devolved governments, a lot in common with what Dr. Kisa is saying there. There's also, we are also dealing with those issues, those impulses. But I will pose a question just to conclude to Isha. Now, when we talk about, I like the way Moses put it, that politics happens in this informal space, and it is a way it moves together. But if we are therefore to come up with understanding the issues of governance beyond, let's say, parameters of public accountability, representation, and responsiveness, then we have to bring in this the informal dimension of it. How will we model this? How will we integrate it? How will we organize the informal space so that we see increased accountability? Because in the end, whether it is formal or informal, the main criteria or the main agenda that undergirds the issue of decentralization is the accountability. How can we hold them accountable, even if it is the informal realms? How can we, ensure there is responsiveness of this leadership? How can we ensure that this representation it all borders on these questions, whether it is an issue of formal or informality? And therefore, I think that we should be very careful of over criticizing this good governance part, which I think we need to see areas that are very relatable, despite or notwithstanding the informal imperatives of governance, because at the end of it all, whether formal or informal, will deal with these questions. Even the informal structure deals with these particular questions. And therefore, I think we need to see how the citizens' agencies are being affected by them. Thank you very much, but I welcome more insightful debates on this.
Thank you, Dr. Onyango. We have around 5 to 10 minutes. And maybe we can welcome 1 or 2 very burning issues to bring it to the floor. We are going to have another session next week. I have to remind you on Ethiopia, Rwanda, of course, from Sudan, if hopefully Dr. Hassan will join us. So we'll have 3 other cases, and we will consider these 2 cases together to think more in a comparative manner. But if there is any burning issues that we have discuss before we close the session, I will welcome you.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please introduce yourself and you may have the floor.
Yeah, my name is Frederick Gorova-Mutebi. I am from Uganda, but I also did the Rwanda study.
Okay.
And I've been following decentralization in Uganda for quite a while now. I just wanted to comment on the point that Moses raised of the World Bank and donors praising decentralization in Uganda in the early years. I think that praise did not really so much reflect the fact that decentralization was working at the time. It reflected the fact that the decentralization, the particular kind of decentralization Uganda chose was very much in line with their own thinking at the time. Because Uganda went for devolution very quickly. And as we know, whether you can succeed with decentralization of the devolution type is really dependent on the strength of the central state. You can't go for devolution and it makes sense within the context of a weak state, a weak central state. So if you claim that you're going to give power to elected leaders to make decisions autonomously from the center, which is usually based on the assumption that somehow local elites are public spirited and are therefore going to do the right thing, I think that it's a mistake. And some of the things we have seen happen along the way, what some people think is a reversal of the gains of decentralization, in my opinion, is actually adjusting the system to make it more realistic. For instance, one particular reform that has taken place was the recalling of the powers of appointment of chief administrative officers from local governments back to the center. The chief administrative officers are the chief accounting officers of local governments. Now, previously they were appointed by local councils, by local elected leaders in the name of autonomy. The problem with that is that it opened them to manipulation by local leaders. First of all, they would ask for really quite untenable actions from the accounting officers, say to allocate money to things that are not budgeted for, and if they refused, in many cases, they would be pushed out. It also meant that local governments used to appoint only those people who were born locally. And if you applied for that job and you were from another place, it was very unlikely that you would get it regardless of whether you were experienced or skilled or not. Now, the center got wind of this and these appointments were taken back to the center. Now, what that has meant is that it has made accounting officers a little bit more capable of resisting manipulation from local leaders and therefore more likely to make the right decisions within the law as opposed to the past. I mean, there are many things that have gone wrong with decentralization, and Moses would have mentioned the multiplication of districts and so on. I wasn't here. My Wi-Fi got a bit of a problem and took long to fix. But yeah, there are some, at the technical level, there are certain things that have happened which, in my opinion, are much more realistic than was the case in the beginning. And if you hear the World Bank and donors criticizing the government for reversing the gains of decentralization, they're actually referring to some of these technical reversals. The other point is the one that Gideon raised, which is that Kenya is still experimenting with decentralization. I think that in many cases, countries that approach decentralization by way of experimentation do tend to get it right, rather than those that approach it from a doctrinaire point of view, who think that the best way to decentralize is to go full blast for devolution. But if you start if you start small and you proceed in an incremental form, countries tend to get it right, as we shall see the case of Rwanda, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mutepe.
Jonas, can I just quickly
Yes.
say a few
Yes, you
things?
may
I
have
know
a minute or two.
yeah, I know we're
Okay.
wrapping up, and there was a question in the chat as well, which I can quickly respond to.
Please.
So Dr. Goloba has sort of recalled a few of the things I had said earlier in my presentation, including, you know, re-centralization, but which he's calling adjustment. For example, taking away the powers of appointing the chief administrative officer, taking it away from the local councils to the central government. In a sense, I mean, I think the point he ended on of experimenting in the Ugandan case, it's a little bit complicated story of sorts, because yeah, so the World Bank and external donors were pushing the decentralization agenda, but we also have to remember, and I pointed out this earlier, that part of the spirit and thinking behind Uganda's power devolution came out of the NRA and its rebel governance, you know, framework. As you know, so the you know, Museveni and NRA had this idea of, you know, empowering local people to you know, make decisions that matter and to be politically engaged on matters that affect them at the local level. So in a sense, there was some, I think, an important organic basis for Uganda's decentralization. Now, I don't know whether in the end the devolution approach was too much to implement. I would think that it could have been done, and it worked in some ways, you know, up to a certain point. The question is, you know, why did it fail along the way, or why was there the need to adjust, as Dr. Goloba was saying? Was it because the whole arrangement had been, you know, lifted and brought into Uganda wholesale from somewhere else by the World Bank? I'm not entirely sure that was the case. I think that, you know, there was an important domestic and local content in the decentralization framework, and a lot of it had to do with, you know, Museveni's own, you know, rhetoric and expressed agenda of, you know, popular democratic local governance, as you know, from the experience of the rebel governance, and his own mission of wanting to change Uganda, wanting to move Uganda away from a despotic system that, you know, had been in place since colonial times. So anyway, I think, you know, there is, in my view, yeah, you know, there was sort of a superficial external tenor to the whole thing, but there was also an important internal, domestic and organic basis for the experiment. Let me just, Jonas, in a minute, and then I'll stop there. Say, somebody was asking an important question about the demand for districts, and where, and you know, there is demand and there is a supply of districts in Uganda. So in 1962, at independence, Uganda had 17 districts. In 1991, when sort of the decentralization wagons started moving, you know, and things were sort of getting in the direction of more and more power devolution, even before the legal and constitutional framework that I talked about had been concluded in 1995 and 1997. So in the early 1990s, Uganda had about 39 districts. Today, we have 135 districts. So in a period of about 30 years, the district count in Uganda has moved from 39 to 135. 135. And I think the number is going to continue going up. And it happens every election time, closer to national election is when districts are created. So the demand, and for me, it's it's an interplay of national power calculations on the part of Museveni and NRM on the one hand, and local elite interests as well, because creation of new districts means creation of, positions of power, of elective offices that, local elites are going to cash in. And in some cases, the demand for districts is very local. It's very, bottom up. There is pressure. There is people want districts because, there's this sense of, a new district means some sense of some element of sovereignty, of independence, but in substantive terms, actually, these districts have done very little, if anything, to bring services closer to the people, which is what they are supposed to be. So where will it all end, which is, I think, the question that somebody was raising in the chat. I don't know where it will end, and it seems to be something that both the central government and local elites are willing to play and continue playing. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Moses, for the elaboration. We have a lot of issues to discuss based on these two comparative case studies, and the next week issues of local government, especially the historical trajectories of local government, the post-colonial period, 1990s, then and now. It looks like it is decentralized, it's re-centralizing back. Formal, informal interaction, and authoritarian resilience, or any form of progressive politics can happen in what kind of interaction we need between formal and informal. The absence of resistance, agency, the weakening of agency from the people, weak society, strong states, weak state, strong society. When does a local government be effective? That's the question Mutebi was asking later. Local government, you was saying local government doesn't happen in a vacuum. The national politics is important, but the local, the people, the neighborhood politics also important. So where is the balance is an important question. As a concluding remark, we can take it to next week to raise more issues using Ugandans, Rwandan, Sudanese, and Ethiopian case studies. I thank the panelists, both Moses and Onyango, and all participants for your comment, questions, and attendance. Thank you very much. See you next week. Bye.